Welcome back to another episode of History in Your Own Backyard. I'm your host, Susie Selleck, here today in North Dearborn County near Dover, Indiana. And I'm joined by Gary Gellert and Jim Helm. Gentlemen, thank you very much for having me. Gary, I'm going to throw this first question to you. When was North Dearborn High School opened?
Well, North Dearborn High School opened in 1959, and this was a farm. The property was Roy Lutz's, and they sold it to Roy Lutz sold it to the school, and they built the school. And the dedication was right down here, and it was on a hay wagon. The speaker was on a hay wagon. There was the band, the majorettes played. There was a huge crowd, and it was very exciting in 1959.
Okay. All right, so there were a couple of schools that actually had to consolidate in order for North Dearborn High School to become North Dearborn High School. Which one of you guys would like to talk about the schools that had to consolidate in order to do that? Should give this one to Jim?
Well, as I recall at that time, there were two high schools that came in. They were small community high schools, Guilford High School in Guilford, Indiana, and at Bright was the other high school, Bright High School, and those two high schools had the powers to get together and discuss building a new school, and they needed a new school, and they needed to do something, and the state was pushing a higher enrollment school at that time, and that's how they got together, and North Dearborn was born.
Gary, can you talk to us what happened to those high school buildings?
Yes, the Guilford High School became an elementary for a number of years until East Central was built, and then it was it's a firehouse. And the Bright High School became an elementary until the East Central building was built, and then it was torn down, most of it, and it's the Possum Bar, I think, in Bright, Indiana. But the community was starting to grow. And so, the enrollment started increasing. And so those elementaries, in my elementary class, there were like 45 kids in one room. And in my brother's class, he's 4 years younger, there was almost 60 in a class. So that's why North Dearborn became so important, because the community was starting to grow. And the school was formed from 5 townships: York, part of Kelso, Harrison, Logan, and Miller Township, and the small communities of Dover, New Alcest, Guilford, Logan, and Bright, West Harrison made up that's where the kids came from.
Gary, can you talk to us about what the demographics, maybe not the demographics, what was the community like in the 60s?
Well, the community was very rural. We still have a rural flavor today, but it was more rural, a lot of farmers, a lot of working class, small towns, and tremendous community support. When there was a ball game on Friday night, you couldn't get a seat in the gym, and it was just so exciting. Everything revolved around the school.
Jim, as a speech and English teacher at North Dearborn High School, can you talk to us about how many graduating classes there were?
I suppose I could. Let's see. It seemed like North Dearborn High School was here for a long, long, long time, but when you look back, it was only in existence 14 years. And from 1959 through the last graduating class, which we had commencement here, was in May of 1973. So that was a total of 14 years. And if you ask a lot of people, you'd say, how long was North Dearborn High School there? They'd say, I don't know, 20 years or so. But it just was, you just couldn't realize it was only 14 until we moved on.
And you had come over from a different school, right?
I was in another small school corporation north of here for my first 5 years of teaching. And when I first came out of college, I went there. That was my first job. I was there for 5 years and was a basketball coach and taught English and several other different subjects. And then I came here in the summer, which would have been July of 1968. This Sunman-Dearborn Corporation, which still exists today and will continue to exist, started July 1 officially of 1968, and I was hired that particular month. So I was here at the beginning of the corporation.
Very nice. Now, we were talking earlier, graduating classes. Oh.
Say something. Yeah. He was a very good basketball coach at Whitewater, and he played North Dearborn. And unfortunately for him, North Dearborn beat him, and I think that's one of the reasons he came here to teach.
Well, we're going to go over to the source. Jim, is that true?
I have to comment, yeah, you never do. Yeah, they were better than we were because they had a lot of depth. I did not have the depth. But then I always told them, I said, no wonder they beat me. One of the referees was the brother of the athletic director, and the other referee was one of the principal or something. You know, we always had that fun over the years.
There you go. So when you got here, did you start coaching?
No. I left coaching totally, as that was one of the things that the superintendent at the time, his name was Earl Cassard, and he was the first superintendent who officially took over at the Sunman-Dearborn Corporation. And he asked me, when I interviewed with him, he said, "Are you ready to quit coaching?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And I had my reasons. I had great teams. I won a lot of ball games. I had a great coaching career, but I just didn't want to do it forever.
Yeah.
I had other things that I would rather do, and so he asked me if I was ready to quit coaching, and I said I am. But I think Gary could tell you there, when you get something like that in your blood, you never totally lose it. But I still stayed involved in the game. I refereed basketball for many, many years and was connected. So I was connected in other ways.
Jim, can you talk to us about the enrollment at North Dearborn High School and the graduating classes, just numbers?
Well, the 1959 year, Gary, you can check me on this, but I think I would say 400 at North Dearborn High School. 350 to 400 in that first year. There was continual growth each year for that whole 14 years. That's why we ended up, one of the reasons we ended up consolidating, needed bigger and more facilities. And also in those years, it just seemed that the housing grew. There were lots of students interested in coming to this school. The facilities were nice, and people had never known that good of facilities in their life at these two small schools.
So after graduation, what did people do? What did these students go on to do?
Well, basically in those days, you're talking in the years when there was a lot of manufacturing in this entire area. Many, many people went to work in manufacturing jobs. There were several car manufacturing jobs, General Motors and Ford and different ones, within 30 miles of here, and they were good jobs and they had good benefits, so a lot of people went to work. Mm-hmm. Some people went on to college. I would say there were less percentages in those days, but many people did go on to college and become very, very successful. There were some people that just kind of matriculated to the service. Mm-hmm. One of the U.S. services, that was another option.
Yes. He hit the four areas. I just want to emphasize that during the North Dearborn's tenure, it coincided with the Vietnam War, and so we had a number of our graduates fight in the Vietnam War, and then later there was a draft, and so you had no choice, and so there were a very patriotic community, and a number of our graduates did go on to the service, but it was the Vietnam War era.
Gotcha. Well, that would lead me right into the next question, which is the community support. I mean, when I think about this area of Indiana, I typically think tight-knit. Was it like that back then?
Tremendously high community support. It didn't matter what activity was going on here, the community would rally around it. Gary and I talked a while back, we reminisced about the band got so huge. And tremendously was a very famous band down the road. Did a lot of TV commercials later on in later years. Appeared on television right here at North Dearborn. They used to do the old Paul Dixon show. Lots of community support because the band raised the majority of its own money, and they had a big fudge sale. Gary remembers it quite well. But there would be how many people out here baking fudge, Gary?
There would be scores of people, and we had the whole community was mapped out. Everybody in the band got a road or two roads, and there were little houses shown on it, and you went and everyone bought fudge. Everyone bought fudge, and that's what supported the band.
Wow. So fudge supported the band, and you and I talked earlier about how big boys basketball, I was informed, and the band, like boys basketball and the band. Can you talk to, were you in the band?
I was in the band, and I was a minor role in basketball. I wasn't very good, but I did play basketball. But I played trumpet in the band, and it was tremendous. We probably had, out of 400 kids, 140 kids in the band. It was almost half the school. And so we would go to the 500 parade. We would lead the Reds opening day, go to St. Patrick's Day. We were on the Paul Dixon show. And Charlie Green was our director, and he told us, and he had us believe that we were the best band in the country. We believed it. And so when we practiced for marching for parades, whether it's the For Sale Pumpkin Show or the Aurora Farmers Fair, we would march here in front of the school in the parking lot, and then go out on North Dearborn Road. And we would march on North Dearborn Road, middle of the day, no traffic.
And Gary, I'd like to add that Charlie Green was that unique individual who had a way of blending all of the activities together, and the band sort of supported the other activities. They played every football game, they played every basketball game, they played all kinds of things. And the other thing that Charlie Green did as a band director, which is different today, things change, of course, but Charlie set it up so any student interested could be in band. You might have had the best basketball player, the best football player, or many athletes did one or the other. So they took band during the day as a class, and then after school or whenever they had rehearsals or did practices or parade practices, if an athlete his sport was in season at that time, he was excused from that particular thing. However, when the parade came around on Saturday, they marched anyway.
And during the football game or basketball game, you took off, you put on your, you just picked up your instrument, and you marched on the football field. Or for band, we marched on the gym floor. We had shows where the whole band would go up and down the gym floor, and the basketball players did that. They missed the halftime speeches.
Wow.
A couple of other big community activities each year of the many, one was the variety show. That drew lots and lots of people, and that was the students and different people and some of the teachers that just put on a good, fun show. As just the same as a basketball game at that time, the bleachers would have been packed. And also, the band always put on a extravaganza-type Christmas show at one of the half times. It had lighted Christmas trees walking around on the floor and some other things. But that community support you're talking about, it could not have been better. It was just tremendous.
When you talk basketball, they kind of say that if you have a good basketball and good band, you have a good school. And so we had both. And there's some thought that maybe the consolidation was so we could compete with Lawrenceburg and Aurora, because Lawrenceburg and Aurora were the big city schools, and Guilford and Bright couldn't compete with them.
Right.
They won one sectional in 45 years, I believe, and Guilford won a sectional. Bright never won a sectional. Well, North Dearborn in 13 years won 4 sectionals. The first one was in 1962. Seaborn Hillis was the coach, and I was a little toddler, 10 years old. But I remember the bonfire that we had afterwards. I mean, it so excited to take your team up to Connorsville because we beat the Lawrenceburg and Auroras. And then we won in 62, 63, 64, and 68. So we won 4 sectionals. Exciting.
So, Jim, you and I were talking earlier about basketball, and like girls basketball was part of an association, so not really part of the high school. So what did the high school, what kind of sports did they offer?
Well, most sports in those days, interscholastic high school sports, were dominated by boys. However, there was an organization called the GAA, the Girls Athletic Association, and they had their teams, but they weren't IHSAA sports, so to speak. They were more club-type sports, and they played other schools and did other things. And as I recall, I think they played softball and basketball and volleyball and some things like that. So the girls had the GAA side. The boys were under the auspices of the Indiana High School Athletic Association. And the sports that they had would have included basketball, has been mentioned here quite a bit. Of course, you're in the state of Indiana. basketball is synonymous with Indiana in many, many ways.
It is.
But also, they started a football team here. It was a pretty small school to start football, but they did and got it going. Baseball was big, and I'm going to let Gary speak to one of the big aspects that occurred here or resulted from one of the athletes in the baseball world. Cross country was big, track was big. There were just quite a few sports like that. And actually, North Dearborn was a very successful school in all sports. And I would say on the girls, on the GAA side and the boys side.
Okay. Very nice. So what was he alluding to earlier?
When you think of fine athletes, probably one of them that comes to mind is Jim Lytle. And he was a four-sport athlete, but he got drafted by the New York Yankees to play baseball. He went to Florida State on a full scholarship and graduated, or didn't graduate, but he got drafted by the New York Yankees and eventually played some professional baseball. So that was exciting. Probably the basketball player, the leading scorer was Donnie Lips, was the leading scorer. I'd say cross country, I remember they had really good cross country. And we had Gerald and Harry Wilson were two brothers that ran from Bright to North Dearborn before school for practice. They ran from Bright to North Dearborn every day. Their dad would follow them in the car, and that they would practice that way. But they were excellent runners. And then on the girls' side, I would say one of the finest athletes was Beverly Jeffries.
Okay.
She was
What was her sport?
basketball for sure, probably all of them, but I can remember basketball. And like it was a shame that we've come a long way in girls sports.
Yeah.
But in the 60s, with just as an association, it just wasn't as big as the boys.
Right.
So I think we're a lot better off today. But Bev was quite an athlete. Ted Ahouse, Donnie Lips. Can you think of some other ones?
Oh, gee. I was going to tag on to what you said about Jim Lytle. I recall later, after he was drafted by the New York Yankees, Jim Lytle was later inducted into what is today the East Central Athletic Hall of Fame. And it was very interesting to hear him talk of being a kid who left North Dearborn, went to Florida State, and then was drafted by the Yankees. And he talked about when he went into his first New York Yankee locker room, he was lockering beside Mickey Mantle and some of the greats up there. And he talked about that. He said, I was in such awe of them. But they were very, very nice to me and treated him very nicely. And later on, he was with the Yankees, and later on he was traded to the Dodgers, and he played for the Dodgers for a while, too. I remember going to Cleveland with some people one time when he was still with the Yankees and seeing him play in Cleveland Stadium and playing the New York Yankees. And then later on, a lot of people would go down every time the Dodgers came into Cincinnati to play.
Oh, yeah.
Like people would go down, and Jim played some outfield down there, but he was a great athlete. He really was. And he's a great guy. He's a great guy today.
Jim, as it's been said so far in this interview, the band and basketball do very well here. So talk about some of the people, just some noteworthy names that were involved with the music program.
Oh, gee. Well, as we said, Charlie Green was a director, but he influenced a tremendous number of people to go into music as careers. For example, there were several of his graduates around here who became high school band directors. David Kling would be one. Kenzie Bennell was involved in that. Who's a couple more, Gary?
Doug Sykes.
Dennis Berkwine was very involved in music after he left here. But they went on to be big, and they carried on to, I would say, the tradition of Charlie Green, and their bands became strong and big, and now most of those guys are retired now, too. I serve on the Southeastern Indiana Musicians Hall of Fame board, of which I'm lucky enough to be a member, but David Kling is on that board. Kenzie Bennell's on that board. There are several old band directors. I say old, I'll say former. I don't want to tell their age. But they went on to do a lot, and so have their students done the same. They have many graduates who are out there playing professionally today. One of the graduates I recall was I think Patrick Keeler's one that I think the last I heard, I don't know who he's playing for now, but he's in the Nashville scene. And at one time, he was the bass player for Loretta Lynn and some things like that. But there are a lot of those people. And then there's another one, De Bruler has a recording studio here in Bright, and music was a big part of his life, and they do recordings there to this day. So I don't know. There was a tremendous amount of carryover from Charlie Green's program. I always said when I first heard the story, the music band, the musical, which was out and became a movie, some guy goes into a community and does all this. I said, well, how could that ever happen? I want to tell you, Charlie Green, the music band, was in this community, in my opinion.
So, Gary, can you talk to us about some of the extracurricular social activities that were going on in that time?
Well, the first two that come to mind would be the FHA, the Future Homemakers of America, and the FFA, Future Farmers of America. Those are large organizations. Well, what are they today? FCCLA and FFA are huge in East Central, but the roots came here. And so FFA and FHA were important. We had Latin Club, Spanish Club, because not many schools taught Latin. Right. So, but we had Latin Club. Pep Club was huge. We had cheering sections, boys and girls. We had a block, and so Pep Club. Can you think of other clubs?
Well, I was just thinking about when you said Pep Club, it reminds me that was big in Indiana basketball back in those days. You would have a whole he said a block, a whole big section of the bleachers, and they would be dressed and coordinated, like the school colors, and there would be striped in the middle. They planned it all out, how the colors worked out. And not only did they have this big pep block and these cheerleaders and all this cheering, they coordinated their cheers, they practiced their cheers, and you actually had rehearsals for the pep group to go to the gym and practice their block cheers for the upcoming games at that time a lot of times. It was just big all over Indiana.
Very cool.
We had the junior class play and the senior class play, and we had for social activities, we would have a sweethearts dance, prom, and then we started homecoming with football. Football, I think, started here in '63. It might have started with the JV team first, and then went into a varsity team. But we had homecoming. So homecoming, sweethearts dance, prom is what I remember.
Yep, touch on it.
Another thing that was popular back in those days after basketball games was a sock hop.
A sock hop. Guys,
sock hop is?
I don't.
Well, they didn't allow anybody on these nice, beautiful gym floors anywhere in the state without gym shoes, official gym floors. So, but they would let the kids have a dance after the game sometimes with a DJ, but you had to kick your shoes off and dance in your socks. So they were called sock hops. They were very popular all over the country.
Okay, sounds fun. Super sad that I missed that. I think I would have killed it. Did you have anything to add? Did you ever go to a sock hop? Be honest.
Well, sure. It's after the game. What do you do after the game?
Okay, were you a good dancer?
No.
I might further say that there were a lot of people, back in my high school days, there were sock hops too. And it was uncommon for one or both shoes of someone to disappear for the evening.
So, Jim, North Dearborn High School did close. Why did it close?
I will give you my understanding and version of what I was told at that time. What happened was the state was pushing for a minimum enrollment in larger high schools to get rid of the small high schools. Well, Guilford and Bright would have been in that category. However, they had already consolidated. They were here, and North Dearborn had a pretty substantial enrollment, and I think fell within the guidelines minimums of the state. Sunman High School, with whom we went together with later, was getting pressured, I think, a little bit by the state because they were a smaller high school. And I was always told that they were going to have to consolidate with someone. And they struck up conversations with the administration here, and thus the Sunman-Dearborn Community corporation was born in 1968. I don't remember, maybe Gary does, but at the time of that corporation was formed, Sunman High School continued to exist, North Dearborn High School continued to exist until the end of 1973. But my understanding was that I don't think people thought or talked about or heard about consolidating further Sunman and North Dearborn at that time. And then later on, they did, and East Central High School was born.
Now, Gary, do you have anything to add on to that?
No, but it was, speaking as an alumnus,
Okay.
We're very sad of the demolition. I mean, we have great, but even though the building's demolished, we have great memories and great feelings for North Dearborn High School. So we're sad that it's being demolished, but the memories will live on. And so I think I can say that as an alumnus.
And I think I can back that up, because a lot of times we do get a feel as we come into different communities and spaces and stuff like that, what people are saying and the tribute to the things that happened when we're covering them. So, well, is there anything else that either of you gentlemen would like to touch on in honor of North Dearborn High School?
Well, Gary's right. It's very sad to see the building go, see it torn down. It had such a tremendous history for such a short existence of 14 years. And I can certainly speak to all that from experience, because the small high school that I attended was torn down after I graduated from it. And then the first school where I took my first teaching job was later torn down. And then I came to North Dearborn, and now it is torn down. So I went from there to East Central, and if the day comes they tear down East Central, I don't know when that will ever be, but my history of torn down schools is pretty high.
And yet, Jim Helm remains. And we are very grateful that we got a chance to interview and talk to you today. And Gary Gellert, it was very nice talking to you today. Is there anything that you would like to touch on?
No, I think we've covered it, and we're looking forward to this.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us on another episode of History in Your Own Backyard. Hope you enjoyed your time with us here today at North Dearborn High School. Gary and Jim, thank you so much for being such wonderful guests today. And remember, travel slowly and stop often. Bye for now.